My name is Ben Walters. I work on the EPUB Reader in Microsoft Edge and the books experience in Edge, along with my team in Paris. I'm going to talk about EPUB in the browser overall, which includes EPUB in Edge, but also some thoughts on what it means to be an EPUB reader in a browser, however you get in the browser. But first, since this is kind of a diverse room, I want to ask you a few questions and kind of figure out who I'm talking to tailor the presentation a little bit. So first of all, how many people here work on EPUB reading systems, EPUB readers? Garth, raise your hand. It's maybe 15 or 20 people. All right, how many people work in publishing? Okay, that's more than half the room, probably. How many people develop EPUB production tools, creation tools? Okay, that's actually about 20 people, more than I thought. That's great. How many people have tried out the EPUB reader in Edge? Okay, also about half the room. That's pretty good. Last, how many people think it's crazy to build an EPUB reader in the browser? All right, just a handful. I think that sets me up well. I hate agenda slides, but I do want to get two things across. First of all, I'm going to kind of go broadly through kind of what it means to be an EPUB reader in the browser. And so I'm going to talk about some things that are more and less technical, so kind of just stay tuned as we go. And I'm just going to highlight the same thing we've been doing with the other presentations, which is try to save some time at the end for question and answers. I think really, since this really is kind of a broad topic, there are a lot of angles to it. I think that's going to be a great place to kind of go deep on the things that are most important to you. So as we get kind of towards the 15-minute mark, 18-minute mark, kind of like stretch out and get ready to go to race to the mic and ask the first question. All right, with that, I'll start and give you a quick update on what we've done in Edge and what we're doing now. So first of all, in the spring of last year, we put out our first release of an EPUB reader in Edge. We launched a bookstore in the US, and we added support to open EPUB 2 and EPUB 3 files in the browser, both fixed layout and reflowable. In general, at that point, we could open the vast majority of EPUB files that were out there, probably without a lot of the bells and whistles, certainly without some of the kind of optional features like media overlay support, but we did our best to be able to at least open the majority of content that's been created since the beginning of EPUB. In the fall of last year, we added support for PDF books in our store, and our big focus in EPUB was to add annotations to the EPUB reader, as well as services to support roaming of annotations, including ink on EPUB and ink notes, and ink directly on PDF. With that, I'll show you a quick video of what it looks like if you buy a book in the Microsoft Store. You click on the Microsoft Store app here on Windows. You can navigate through to a book's vertical and see the kind of things you'd expect to see in most bookstores, kind of your top feeds and curated lists and things like that. Here, this is a Mother's Day feed. I'm going to go ahead and click on a book here. I've already purchased this one, but you can see as I scroll down through the list, I have things like reviews, I have metadata about the book, other books I might like, and so on. And when I click on Read, what happens, of course, is that we go directly into Microsoft Edge. We open up our book's library experience and then open the book in background, and you can start swiping and go. All right. So we're obviously still hard at work here. A few weeks ago, we released a new update to Windows where we added support for a variety of new EPUB features, or new to us EPUB features, as well as new features for reading in the browser in general. The biggest one on the EPUB side is really media overlays. We kind of did our first release of media overlays, and so we're really excited about that. We did a big user interface refresh to align with the new Microsoft Fluent design for reading in general in the browser, including in EPUB, PDF, and so on. We had support for page numbers and go to page, which I know is a big ask from a lot of folks in the industry. We added grammar tools, which are really exciting. This lets you do a couple things, but notably see things like part of speech and highlight those in book content as you read. We added improvements to our annotations experience. We also made some fixed layout improvements. So as I said before, we opened most reflowable and fixed layout EPUBs that are out there, but we had some bugs over time. And so now we can safely say we can open almost all EPUBs that are out there. I won't say everything, but almost everything. So if you had something that wasn't working, like the program from today, go ahead and open it with a new version of Windows. At the same time, of course, Windows isn't the only thing out there. If you're going to buy a book from somebody, you need to be able to read it on the device that you have in your pocket. So we've also been hard at work building our apps for iOS and Android. A few months ago, we released Microsoft Edge for iOS and Android, so you can kind of roam your favorites and get a consistent browsing experience across your devices. Coming very, very, very soon, you'll be able to see books you purchased directly in Edge on the phone as well. So enough about Edge. I'm going to talk a little bit about EPUB in the browser in general. What's good, what's bad, what's hard, and what's kind of somewhere in between. So first of all, when I talk about EPUB in the browser, I like to point out that there are really kind of at least 4 different ways that you can get an EPUB reader in a browser. First of all, extensions are very common. You have things like Redium in Firefox and Chrome, where you can either read local EPUB files or you can read EPUB files that are kind of uploaded through a service. The most common way to read EPUB books in the browser is, of course, websites and web readers themselves. Again, you might be able to purchase a book through a service, and EPUB may be the back end as content is streamed down through standard HTML and JavaScript technologies. You can take that a step further and make that a progressive web app, which might let you install that kind of website and service outside of the browser. It may give you an experience that works offline at the same time. And then last but not least, their browsers themselves. There's Microsoft Edge. Of course, we launched our EPUB support last year. The Yandex browser turns out also supports EPUB, which I didn't realize until recently. I think they're not really working on that actively right now, but that's also out there. So with that, I'll start kind of doing some demos here of what it looks like to be inside the browser. So the first question that if you purchase a book is, how do I get back to that book in the browser? Where do I put it? In Edge, we've created a purchase books experience that lives kind of alongside of your favorites and reading list and download history and so on. And so once you get to that experience, you have something that looks more like a books client app than it does the web browser itself. You can see I can scroll through my list of books. I can do things like click on a particular book and see a download experience, which may or may not work with the network here. But in general, there are a couple things I want to point out. First of all, we're introducing a new list of things to read in the browser. And every time we introduce a new user experience in the browser, we have to think long and hard about how users are going to be able to discover this, how they're going to be able to relate this to other things in the browser. Ultimately, we decided to separate books from things like reading list and favorites so that, because it's really a different end-to-end experience. I go buy a book, it needs to show up somewhere, and then I may want to take that book and add it to my reading list and favorites later on over time. Downloads is another one. Browsers have some UI around downloading a particular website or file. In that experience in the browser, the user may choose where that file goes and whatnot. In a book reading experience, we want to make it simple. We just want to let you click on a book, know it's online, know it's offline, and take it offline when you're ready to do it. Probably the biggest challenge of bringing books to the browser is the concept of offline versus online. When I start in a books app on my phone or on a PC, I know that I'm choosing what's going to live offline, and I know that when I go back to that app, when I'm in the metro, when I'm on a plane, that my books are just going to work. People don't really have this expectation in the browser, and this is one of just the fundamental kind of user interface challenges that we browser vendors have today. Because it's not just books, it's also things like progressive web apps that may have an experience that works offline, and in general, the web allows caching of content that may work offline as well. But users don't always understand that, users don't know that, and so we just have a challenge to educate our users that there are some things in the browser that do work, and if you're on that plane and you've downloaded a book, you should just open up Edge and get back to that content. Some other considerations for the browser. One is that when people look at a web browser, they want kind of 3 things. They want it to be compatible with my sites and my content, they want it to be secure, and they want it to be fast. And when you add a new content type to the browser, it's just critical that from day one you're as fast as you can possibly be. So we do everything we can in Edge to get that first page of content rendered as fast as we can, but EPUB's a little bit challenging in that sense. I'll show you a quick video of what it looks like. If I go navigate to a website, I can just click on a public domain EPUB, and I start to load it in the browser. We have a download experience. The reason is that EPUB isn't really designed for streaming. EPUB itself is a zip container with files inside of it. Those files may be organized in a way that streaming works, but it's really hard to know that in advance. And in particular, given the kind of asynchronous nature of the web, it's very hard to start showing that content before it's fully downloaded on the client. So this is what you get. As soon as that file is downloaded, we try to load it as fast as we can. I'll show you an example here. Here's just, in fact, an EPUB2 file that I have sitting on my desktop. I click on it. It goes directly into Edge. There's no import experience. It just gets my content as fast as we can. And I can start flipping pages and seeing that content. As we do that, we have to make some trade-offs to get that content out there as fast as we can. And so certain features like the Seekbar require some additional pre-processing if we're going to make them work as well as they need to. So while we get that first page of content out there right away, we continue to do work in the background to kind of enhance the experience as you go. And so I'll open that same book again. And this time pay very close attention to the Seekbar at the bottom. You'll see it kind of takes a second to pop in while the content pops in right away. What we've done is we've kind of scanned through the whole content of the book, figured out how long each particular content document is to give you an accurate Seekbar. Since this is an EPUB2, we've also extracted page numbers from the content itself. And so as soon as we do that, we give an experience where your book is fully interactive. But until that point, there are some limitations. And so again, this is kind of the kinds of things you think about to get that content out there right away. So navigation is kind of the star of putting EPUB in the browser. Users spend a huge amount of time in the web browser, on a PC, on their phone. This is how they consume most information today. When you add EPUB to the browser, users get a familiar way to consume that information, to organize their sessions of reading. And I'll give you a quick example. I can take this presentation here is an EPUB in the browser. I can do something like duplicate that to another tab. Now I've got two copies of this presentation that are open side by side. I can drag this out to its own window. And then I can do something like navigate in the second copy of this presentation, and I can compare different chapters in a book, different parts of the presentation, and so on. Some book readers may let you do this, but a lot kind of give you an experience where you have one book open at a time. And I think this is a great way for people to really consume information alongside things like Wikipedia articles and documents and so on directly in the browser. There are a lot of different ways to read in the browser. EPUB is one of them. When we think about fixed layout EPUB, obviously the first thing we think about is PDF. And while there are a lot of drawbacks with PDF, in general, we want to make sure that we have an experience that is very much aligned between when you read a book in EPUB and when you read a book or a document in PDF. And so in Edge, we've created essentially the same reading user experience around the book itself. You can see I've got features that I expect in PDF, like 1-page and 2-page, zoom in, zoom out, fit to width, and so on. And so in fixed layout EPUB, we've added the same features. You can pinch to zoom, and you have a very consistent experience across the different formats. In reflowable EPUB, the biggest analogy we think about is probably reading view or reading mode inside of a browser. But I think of EPUB as being somewhere kind of halfway between the web itself and reading view. And so if you don't know what it is, reading view is a way to extract the primary content out of a web page or article. Here's a New York Times article. If I go to the reading view version of this, the browser has extracted just the content itself. So we've lost the author's styles. We've maybe taken out a primary image, maybe taken out the important links. But the rest of the stuff around it, the navigation, the ads, the formatting is gone. And so I get a very simple experience. I can do things like change the page theme. And they work in a super, super basic and consistent way. EPUB's a little more complicated. And so when we talk about bringing books to the browser, we're not just taking reading view and kind of enhancing it just a little bit. First of all, books can be long. We have to kind of virtualize the content that we laid out. That's clear. But we also, as we implement features like themes and font sizes, we have to create this kind of delicate balance where we're both respecting the designs and preferences of the author, along with the preferences of the user at the same time. Reading view just doesn't do this at all. Reading view is just really constructing HTML from the ground up. And so there's no author style that it's taking into account. There are a variety of other features that you just kind of think about as you go. Things like the address bar. What do you put in the address bar? Here's a local file. We put just the file path. If you buy a book through our store, we give you kind of the title of the book, and we just give you a search field. In general, we want to make sure things like forward and back navigation just work the same way through books as they do through the web, and so on. Extensions are another sticking point for us. Certainly, we don't want to have you install an extension that's able to extract content from a book we sell. On top of that, the EPUB Reader and Edge is an HTML document itself that wraps the book content, and so extensions don't always kind of work out of the box. And so for now, we've just disabled extensions. I don't know if that's really the right thing to do long term, but it's certainly difficult to have a world where you have both extensions and EPUB in the browser at the same time. Kind of the last thing I'll talk about on this side are debugging tools. Now there are lots of book reading apps do have debugging tools, but I think there's kind of nothing easier than using the debugging tools in the browser if you are a web developer already. And I'll give you the quick live demo here. In your debugging tools, you just hit F12, you get them. You can see the full tree of HTML of what your content looks like, and you can change it inline to quickly iterate and see the results. And so I think F12 is fantastic, so I change, instead of saying that the heading is good, it's great, and I see that updated with hearts and smileys right away. On top of that, probably my favorite feature in F12 is the accessibility tree that we show as well. And so if you generated your EPUB from a tool and you're not really sure if screen readers are going to be able to read text in the right order, if your images have alt text and so on, you can just use F12 in the browser and start navigating through the same tree that those screen readers use themselves. And so here you can see, I can see both the outer content from the page as well as the actual EPUB. If I go into this particular page, I can jump in, I can see that my heading text comes first, I then get my list and so on. I can see exactly what that text looks like to make sure it's in the right order so that people using those screen reading tools will have a good experience as well. All right, so we're almost to the end. Just to kind of recap, there are some awkward points when you bring EPUB into the browser. And the most critical of those is really the offline-online thing. I can't stress this enough. When people open a web browser, they do it when they're online. They don't tend to do it when they're offline. And you have to train users. You have to find ways that makes sense to a user. And secondly, EPUB just isn't designed for streaming. I think if we design EPUB as a kind of web-first, browser-first content type, we'd be thinking about that from day one, and we'd either make sure the content type EPUB itself supported that, or we'd make sure that tools that developed EPUB optimized for streaming content down. But that said, we built EPUB in the browser, so we actually think it's a really good idea. First and foremost, this is how people consume content. People use tabs, they use windows to consume content. It makes a lot of sense for a book to be side by side. And we get to kind of build and make sure that we're building on the latest browser innovation since we're in the browser itself. I'll give you one last thing, which is a list of some of the kind of tools we use to build EPUB in the browser, particularly in Windows. So we use lots of the latest and greatest stuff from HTML5. We use TypeScript compiled to ECMAScript 2017, which is fantastic. We use Sass to build our CSS. We use Visual Studio 2017, Visual Studio Code to do all this work. Our parsing is done in C++, as well as our content streaming. We use XAML to build our UX, the table of contents, the bookmarks, and so on. We use CSS regions, which is a little unique because they're not supported widely across browsers, as our mechanism to lay out reflowable content. And finally, internally, we use EPUB CFIs as our kind of internal navigation scheme inside of our EPUB reader. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot, and I'll open it up for questions. And I'll be happy to talk about EPUB in the browser, also EPUB at Microsoft in general. Feel free to throw anything at me.
Hi, I'm Makoto. I'm involved in the standardization of EPUB 3, and I also wear the convener hat of SE34WG4, which maintains the OXML standard. Well, you said that EPUB is not designed for streaming, and this is true. And I'm wondering if we use OPF of OXML and use its interleave feature instead of EPUB 3 OCF, it shouldn't be difficult to make EPUB streaming ready. This is my guess. And how do you feel about this possibility?
Yeah, so I think the challenge with streaming is that ultimately, when you're an EPUB reader built on top of one of the browser layout engines, what you want to do is you want to start parsing that content, things like the OPF and whatnot, right away, and then you want to start laying out whatever chapter is the first one you're going to go to, whether the user's last reading position or the start of text in the book. And so you start loading an HTML document. That HTML document is then going to go start synchronously asking for resources like images. So the challenge is, those images may come at the end of the EPUB file, even if all the text and the metadata for that file come at the beginning. And so you certainly can have a system, I think mostly through tooling, that optimizes for especially that first chapter of content for the first view of a book to get as much of that content towards the beginning as you can. But if you're doing, again, a download from the web, it's really about getting those giant images that might fall at the end of your EPUB file to show up at the beginning and have some indicator of that as the reading system that, hey, I've got enough of those bytes down that I know that I can get all the images and show something reliable to your user. So it's kind of a group of things I think you have to do.
Let me make a quick summary of the interleaving features of OPF, which is a part of XML. Basically, you divide each resource. It might be HTML or it might be a JPEG file into pieces, and you reorder them in any order which is convenient for your purpose, and then store everything in a zip file. So what is required, those pieces required for rendering the very first page can appear at the beginning of a zip file, so you don't have to receive the entire zip file. You can only receive, for example, the first half or just 10% of the zip file and can start rendering. This has worked for XPS, so I think that the same thing might work for EPUB.
Yeah, it sounds like it's solving the same problem.
So one remark and then a question. The remark comes back to this whole streaming stuff. One of the reasons that we are looking at the web packaging spec that Garth referred to is because the web packaging spec promises to be streaming friendly. That's one of the features that sort of caught our eyes, and then we'll see whether it works out. That's for the future. The question is not really technical. Until half an hour ago, I thought that you were the only browser that had an EPUB reader. I must admit I didn't know about Yandex. You had some reasons why you decided to go there. How would you try to convince your fellow browser manufacturers on various other places on the globe that this is really something that is worth doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that when we started out to do books at Microsoft, it wasn't really clear that we were going to end up in the browser. We spent a lot of time thinking about whether it made sense to build a separate app or build something in the browser itself. There are a lot of reasons and thoughts on both sides. I think the biggest one in favor of it really is the fact that the PDF is already there in most cases. People really do organize information in this way, and we really want to enable experiences around people being able to read a book. At the same time, they're looking up information in that book. They're clicking on their assistant of some kind to do a search on Wikipedia for more information about that. They may be searching through a scholarly journal at the same time and just surfing the web. And being able to have that in a single integrated experience is a big win for users. I think that's the number one selling point that I can do.
We don't have any other representatives of the other browsers here, unfortunately,
right.
But yeah.
I'll keep looking at Garth, even though he works on books and not the browser.
Thank you. What about offlining? You say it's not customary to use a browser when we are offline, but when I am reading a book in Edge and I come in an area where there is not any network anymore, so there is some offlining experience that has been implemented. How does it work?
Yeah, so we use EPUB throughout, and so EPUB is really the representation of an entire book. And so when you browse through EPUB on the web, we really download that EPUB entirely and put it in the browser cache. If it's a book you buy through the store, we have another mechanism to get that content in the browser. Once it's there, it's offline. When you're navigating through the web, we don't do anything special with EPUB, and so you're kind of at the whim of cache headers and kind of these kind of geeky things in the web, which work, but unfortunately as a user it's really difficult for you to know, was that book that I navigated to set to be cached in the browser so I can get back to it or not? And so what really happens is most people may open it on the web to start with, they click on download and then save it to disk and then get back to it that way. And so it's kind of easy for people to get back to the browser if they click on a file on their local disk, or maybe if they start from, they know the book's library is there, or they've saved a link to the book they purchased, they can get back to it that way. You can also start with the browser, but really getting people to open that browser when they're offline is the challenge. I don't have a magic answer. We kind of add entry points, we add little tutorials to teach users about it, but it's really a work in progress for us to kind of keep teaching users they can get back to the browser offline and get a book reading experience.
Thank you. Another more global question. It looks like you have developed something like a web app or an application for, I would not say an extension, but an application in Edge that opens an EPUB 3. But if we look at web publications as first-class citizens of the web, would you have to restart the development to modify Edge itself to read a web publication or an EPUB 4?
That's probably a long question or a long answer. So you know, EPUB and Edge is mostly written as you build an app. We build really on top of the Edge web platform, although we really work closely with our colleagues in the platform to make sure we have an experience that works great in Edge. I think a lot of the things we build in the EPUB reader, if we were to build web publications in the browser, we would reuse. Kind of the scheme for navigation that we use, our reading UX, I think that all applies. I think there are different ways to think about how you might bring web publications in the browser. As I've talked about before, I think we need to think about how you could bring them into the browser as an extension. And if you can build an extension that can be a reader for web publications, it actually becomes a lot easier for browser vendors to do that as well. Browsers are huge development projects. And we don't have to put every feature that we build in the core CSS layout engines of the browser. We can build something like web publications and decide to do that rather at the app level, or we can build that at the platform level. It's not really clear right now which is best. I think it's clear that we would reuse components of what we built for EPUB if we do support web publications in the future.